Yo, what's up? This is Kels with the Heat and welcome to this beat tutorial. In this video we're going to be talking about making a beat on the MPC Touch and focusing mainly on the Touch hardware rather than the actual software. So we're going to go through the beat making process, which will include drum programming, sampling and bass lines. So before we get into that, excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold. Before we get into that, I'm just going to talk about the interface and what some of the functions do. So obviously you have your 16 pads and then you have 4 banks, which actually if you double tap can go onto a further 4 banks. So you have A, B, C and D, and then if you double tap it and it goes yellow, that means you're then onto E, F, G and H. So that's 8 times 16 pads. So you're able to have 8 times 16 sounds loaded to each pad. Now the touch screen. For those of you who have a MPC Live, this may look slightly different, but most of the functions are the same. So the top part we have our sequence, which is typically just, like any other software or hardware. This is a sequence built up of, in this case, drums, bass line, chops, and whatever other sounds we have. We can change the length of the bars that the sequence is, so we can have a 2-bar sequence, we can have a 4-bar, we can go on up to the 16 bars or however many you want. I would highly suggest keeping the bars small, maybe maximum of 4 bars, and building your sequences from smaller sequences, and it will allow you to have a lot more variety when it comes to sequencing your beat and actually laying out the song mode. Excuse me. Okay, we have tempo right here, which is self-explanatory. This will be the tempo to your sequence. Let's set that to around 86 BPM for now. If you go onto the sequence here, and you have these functions. So if you hit this pencil, it brings up all these options that you're able to apply to that sequence. So I can erase it, I can clear it, I can transpose it, I can copy the sequence, and so forth. This little button here allows you to name the sequence. So you could just go in here and call your sequence 1. I definitely recommend keeping track of your sequences and naming everything that you put there, because it's going to keep you a lot more organized, and again will go help you a lot when it comes to actually arranging the piece of music. Okay, so the second line here is your track. So the tracks, collective of all the tracks that you have will make up the sequence. So I like to keep everything as separate as possible. I don't just have one track for drums, one track for bass, one track for chops. I like to have all of my drum sounds on an individual track. Again, this is just going to help when it comes to arranging. You're going to have everything isolated, so you're able to take away parts here, add parts there, and just give you more freedom. So again, I've named all my tracks. I have a kick on track 1, snare track 2, hi-hats on track 3, cymbals on track 4, drum fill 5, and so on. Again, some buttons here that are applicable to the track. So I have it on this mode here, which is a program. So when you have it on this button here, it means that you've selected a program. Now a program is a collective of sounds. So for example, on this program I have a bunch of drum sounds. As you can see, it says there, drums. You can then hit the plus button, make as many programs as you want. You could have one program for snares, you could have one program for kicks, one program for hi-hats, percussion, and the possibilities are endless. It is important though to make sure that whatever program you have selected is the correct one that refers to the track. So for example, I'm on my kick track, so I want my drum program to be selected. If you accidentally knock this and you change the program while you're still on that track, it's going to then play the MIDI from that track with all the sounds that you have on this program. So you need to make sure that the right program is always selected. If you hit this little plugin, this will then bring up the plugins option. Again, this is something that you'd probably be a lot more beneficial with actually combining the software. I would highly recommend using the software as well as the hardware. So for those of you that do have an MPC Live, definitely look into marrying that up with the software, because it's just going to open up a whole other dynamic to your production, especially when it comes to using plugins and stuff like that. So I actually always use the software just as much as the hardware. So that would be where you select your plugins. You can actually select them from the hardware as well. Then you have MIDI, and I'm not quite sure what that fourth one is. I don't ever use that one. Again, you have the same buttons here that will edit the track, and then at the bottom we have program, which is just like I said. So when you need to be very specific with your programs. Like I said, I have my drums all selected on one program, named drums, and if you add a sample and make some chops, you want to make sure that's on a separate program, and just keep everything as separate as possible. You can, down here we have the transport buttons, the typical, stop, play, start, which will just play it back from the start. To record, you just hold overdub and then play start. That will give you a 4 count. Menu brings you back to this screen. If you main brings you back to this screen. If you hit menu, it brings up all these other options here. So we have sample edit, sampler, pad mixer, program edit. So program edit is all the functions that will affect the program that you have selected. So I'm on the drum program. If I go in here and hit program edit, at the top we have pitch, so the semi. If I play the snare right here, adjusting that will adjust every single sound on the program. As you can see, you have fine tuning as well, and you have all these other functions, volume, panning, and so forth. If you do want to edit one specific sound, make sure that you trigger that sound, hit menu, sample edit. This will bring up the waveform for that sound, and then you can individually tune. You can zoom in and edit the waveform and all your typical functions. So let's actually get into the process of actually putting a beat together. One thing I will mention is that I actually have a template file that I always have saved, that I load up when I'm going to start a beat. So for example, this is my template 1 right here. This is my almost like a blueprint. It has a lot of sounds that I would typically use. And it has the tempo set. It has a couple of effects and stuff applied that I would typically use as well. Just saves you a lot of time, and you can always go and swap out sounds here and there just to make every beat unique to the next one. My damn MPC is dirty by looking at this now. I need to clean this. Okay, so let's say we were starting from scratch and we wanted to load some sounds. What you want to do is hit this shift button and menu. So hold down shift and hit menu. This will then bring up the inventory that is connected to your computer. If you're using it standalone, it will just be the inventory to the I believe the Live has a SD card, so it will just be the same thing. Bring up the inventory, and then you're able to go through all your drum sounds. Let me just demonstrate. Let me do this on a different bank. So yeah, shift menu, and then you're able to go through different sounds. Hit the pad. When the pad is green, it means that this sound will be loaded to that pad. So I can then hit load, and then I then have that sound on that pad. And go to snares. Hit this pad. And that's basically how you load all your sounds. So I already have some sounds loaded. Let's change this to 4 bars. And I'm just going to record again down here. This TC is the timing correct. So this is the typical different timing values that we have. 116, 132. This is just going to quantize it to those time divisions. So I'm going to leave this on 116 for now, and I'm just going to record. I'm going to start off with a very basic drum pattern. So I just want kick, snare, snare, kick. Nothing that's distinctive, just something that is like a groove to follow along with when I start adding my chops. Okay. Something basic. So let's go over to the snare here. Now if we have the timing on, this will be quantized to the grid. You can actually go in here and pinch to zoom. Now if we go and take the timing off and go back into that menu, if I hit this, you can see that it's moving in between the grid space. This is where you're able to be very precise and create that swinging effect. So I always like my snares to come slightly early, slightly before the line, ever so slightly. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. And you want to make sure that this nudge button is selected here. Okay, so this is what I'd usually start off with. We're going to go to a new track. Let's call this track chops. And then we're going to hit plus on the program because we want to start on a new program for our chops. And we do the same thing, shift and menu, and this is where we're going to locate our sample. This is, bear in mind, if you have samples stored on a folder and you're not going to record them in. If you are going to record them straight from a record player, you want to hit menu and sampler. You're going to have your 2 line-ins connected, and whenever you put the needle down on the record, this will register that it's coming through, and then you just hit record. You record the segment of the record that you want, and then once you hit done, it will then bring it up in the sample edit mode like this. But in this case, we're just going to load a sample. So we'll go over here. Okay, just something simple. Make sure the pad is selected again. Hit load. So now we have our sample loaded to one pad. What we're going to do is hit menu and hit sample edit. It's going to bring up the sample waveform. Here we can change the tune. We can start the mess with the envelope, the shape of the waveform, where it starts, where it ends. And if you hit the button down the left corner here and change that to chop, we're able to chop it from here. So if we zoom right in, where are we? Let's go to the start. Now this is a really cool feature. What we're going to do is we're going to chop this in live real time. So whenever I hit the pad next to the one that's green, it's going to add another chop. So and then what I like to do is when I add a chop, I just tighten it up with the knobs here. You can then adjust the start point. Once you have all of your chops, if you hold down shift, this button right here will pop up, convert, hit that. Then you want to scroll until it says new program with new samples, crop samples, create new program. Both of those are checked. Create events is not checked. Hit do it. Then go back to the main menu, go down to the bottom bit where it's program and scroll all the way to the right, and a new program should be created with the chops that you just did. So we're just going to go into the program, we're just going to turn this down a bit. I can mess with the pitch. I'm just adjusting the volume to each chop. Okay, so once we're happy with our chops, we're happy with the pitch, we can then record our pattern. Now this is going to be specific to whatever chops you have. In this case it's something very simple where I already know that the pattern is just going to follow the original pattern. A lot of times I will chop up various different chops. For example, if I have like an open piano piece on a song, I will then chop every single note of that piano and it will just go across all the pads. So I have every single note isolated. I can then come in and play my drums and just figure out a new groove with those chops. Once we have that done, let's take our timing and put that on again. I always record everything quantized, and then once it's recorded I then take the timing off and then I move it to where I want it to be. So let's go ahead and just record these basic chops here. Change the tempo a little bit, speed it up. Okay, so again we're going to take the timing off. Again, this is way easier to do when you're connected to the software, because you can just literally look at your screen. You can highlight, you know, like you would in any other software, and you can just drag with the mouse and put things where you need them to be. With the MP it's a little bit more it's a bit more fiddly. So I want, as we saw earlier, my snares came slightly early. Everything else in my beats comes later than it would on the grid line. So we have everything highlighted, and we're just going to move everything to the right slightly. Not so it goes a complete step, just so it's off the grid a little. And the rule that we want to follow is that the kick drum be the backbone of the entire track. So wherever a kick drum falls, the chops will fall slightly after. So for example, you see this note that I'm adding here? Just for visualization purposes right there. Just imagine that this note at the bottom was a, this note right here was the kick drum. The chops would come slightly after the kick drum. And this will be the same for everything we add. So if a hi-hat is on top of the kick, where it sounds typically like it's in the same place, we want the hi-hat to fall just after the kick. And you want to focus on this throughout the entire sequence. That's what will give you that real good pocket. Like the drums will be swinging real nice if you do that. That's the same, it goes for the bass as well, but we'll get to that. So right, we've moved everything off the grid with our chops. This is when I would then go back to the drums and start defining some sort of drum pattern. So let's take our timing back on and let's just record some extra kicks. And again, this is going to get monotonous. It's the same process repeated. We're going to adjust. Now this is where it gets interesting. So another rule of thumb, if you can see that this is one bar right here. Start of the bar there, and then start of bar 2 starts there. Whenever the loop comes around to the start of a bar, that kick drum needs to be completely quantized, always throughout the entire beat. So as you can see, these are all quantized at the moment, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to just highlight these two that are in between those two. So that's bar 1, the start of bar 1, that's the start of bar 2. I want those quantized. The kicks that are in between, I want them to come slightly late, but bear in mind that things that come on top of those kicks need to be later than the kick. So we don't want the kick to be too late, because then it's going to shift everything else even later. We want the kick to just be off grid to the right ever so slightly. Maybe something like that. You just want to play it by ear and just keep hitting play until you're happy with how it sounds. You can also adjust the velocities here at the bottom. Again, this is tedious. You definitely want to be using the software for this. And then just repeat this process throughout the 4 bars until you are happy. So I'm just going to do this real quick on the software, just for the purpose to speed up the video. Velocity is always important, because when someone is playing a real live drum kit, it's very rare for them to hit a kick or a snare or a hi-hat the exact velocity every single time. So to give it that human feel, you want to add some variation in the velocities. Again, I can focus way more in on drum programming and the science behind the timing and the pocket and everything, but those I can go into way more detail on actual just specific drum programming tutorials, because I'm actually going through a beat making process on this. I don't want to spend too much time on the drum programming, because then the video will end up being way too long. Let's do one more thing here. Let's go. Just going to add a ride cymbal on the top of my snares, and I'm going to record this with the timing off. And what I typically do is I record everything, and then I refer to the software and I make sure that it's where I want it to be, keeping that rule in mind that you want everything to have its own space. So as you can see, we have our snare here. We want our ride cymbal to come slightly after each snare and not to fall exactly on the same place. So I'm just adjusting this now in the software, making sure that that is the case. As you can see, they are now falling just after the snare drum. You can do this on the hardware, but I just prefer doing it on the software. Okay. Now also, I believe that sound is a little loud, so we're just going to go into the program edit. I'm also going to hit sample edit and bring up the sample edit mode for that ride cymbal, and I'm just going to move this knob here, and it's going to adjust the start point. I just want it to start a little bit later of that trail sound and take off the initial strike of the ride cymbal. There we go, keep it more subtle. Of course, so once we get to this stage, we're now able to start bringing in some sort of bass. Let me just go into the preferences over here. Okay, so I have, this is where I'm using a VST that is connected to the software. I'm running through the software, and it just goes straight into the MIDI keyboard, which then goes into the MPC. So whatever I record on here will go into the software, into the hardware, and appear on the software as well. You can do it 16 levels, where you have one bass tone and you do it the same way as assigning a sound, the way we did earlier, where you load the sound. You would then assign that bass tone here, and if you hit 16 levels, you will be able to hit that bass along the 16 pads. I much prefer to do it with a MIDI keyboard. So once we have our sample down, we have our chops, we have our drums going, we want to start establishing some sort of bass line. The first thing you want to do is figure out the scale of what the beat is in. The scale is a particular set of keys. It's typically around 7 keys in 1 octave. So from C to C is 1 octave, 12 notes there. Within these 12 notes will be at least 7 notes that will be in key with the piece of music that we're making. Now, if you're not very good at playing the keys, or you don't really have a great ear, what you can do is press play on your beat and literally go along each key and audition each key. So press play, hit the key C, and listen to see if that's in tune. If that is in tune, then you can maybe write that down. Okay, C is in the scale. Move on to the next one. Do the same. If that isn't in key, then you want to make sure that that's not a note that you hit. Do this throughout the entire octave until you end up with the specific amount of notes for that scale. So let me just go through here and play. Okay, so I think I figured it out, but it sounds like the sample is fine-tuned slightly off, so that means that it's in the right key but the fine-tuning is off, so it's sounding a little bit not right. Now the way I fix this is I typically would get a more sharper, more brighter sound, like a piano, and I want to find the root note. So that sounds like the root note to me. I'm just going to record this note. By the way, if you hit this right here and change this to 1, that means you're just going to loop 1 bar of your 4 bars. If you change it to 2, or loop 2 bars, and so on. So I'm just going to loop the 1 bar, and I'm going to play the 1 note that's the root note. Okay, then I'm going to go to the sample, program edit, and I'm going to edit the fine tuning until it sounds in tune with that piano note. It's going to be quite tricky. What we're going to do is actually do 2 bars. Okay, sounds like we got it. So then we can remove that piano note. Now we know that the sample is at least in tune, so we can go back to our bass. And we're just going to start building our bass line. Now the way that I do this is bar at a time. So again, we're going to go here and change it to just 1 and 1. So this is starting at bar 1 and ending at bar 1. So it's just going to loop 1 bar. And I just want to piece it together, piece by piece. Starting with the root note. So I'm just going to find the root note, which is this one right here. Timing off when we do our bass, and we're just going to build it note by note. So I'm going to hit record. Now this again is where I'll be using the software a lot, but in this case we'll go into the we're just going to focus in on that note here, and again that same rule, making sure that it comes after. Zoom in a bit here, that's 1 bar right there, that's our note. We just want to shift it so the bass will be the latest element. So my bass almost comes 1 grid mark to the right in comparison to where it would fall. So if this was quantized, it would be right there, but we want it to be somewhat late like that. So once we're happy with that note, we'll move on to the second one. We're just going to keep hitting record and piecing it together. Again, doing the same thing within here, making sure that every time you record a note, you move it to where you want it to be perfectly, making sure it's falling after the kick drum and the timing is correct. If it's playing and you just hit overdub, it will just start recording while it's playing. I do that a lot as well. I'll just add a note. The good thing also about using the software is you can just draw notes in with the MIDI, just like you're using any other DAW. Okay, so we've got 1 bar recorded of bass. I'm happy with that. So this is when we move along and highlight the second bar. And again, dude, repeat the same process. So it's very tedious and it's very what's the word? It's like super tunnel vision. It's like focusing in on that particular part. We're not just having 4 bars open and hitting record and recording a 4-bar loop. We're just playing 1 bar at a time, piecing it together, and move. After we record, we then move each note to the perfect placement before we actually move on and do the next note. Now this is not to say that I couldn't play this bass line all in one go, but this is just to make sure that by the time I get to the end of the 4 bars, every single note is going to be perfect, because I've really paid attention to each note and where it falls, the length of the note and everything. so we have 2 bars. Let's hear that all together. And this will be the same process as to when I'm adding any sort of synth, strings, piano. I will do the same method. So I'm just going to speed through this and get the rest of the bass line done. Fourth bar. Bear in mind, I'm drawing a lot of this in. Okay, so again, as you can see, I've done bar at a time, piece it together, made sure that everything is correct before I moved on to the second bar. I repeated that process until I got to 4 bars, and now when I play it all together, from here you can go in and add a piano, some strings. And just repeat the same process, recording it bar at a time, piecing it together bit by bit like a jigsaw puzzle. Once you have an established sequence that you're happy with, what I would then do is, if you click on the sequence and hit the pencil, go to the bottom here, it says copy sequence. We want to hit this, and we're going to copy sequence 1 to sequence 2. So we're going to hit do it, and then we have 2 sequences that are identical. Let's go to the second sequence and let's change that to sequence 2, and let's go to the end bar, and this is where you add some changes. So I'm just going to add this string in here just for demonstration. You can go in and change the bass line. You can do it, maybe have a snare drop out on this sequence. You know, the choice is yours. You can make as many adjustments as you want. The idea being that you want to have as many sequences as you can that are somewhat the same, but very subtle changes each time you duplicate the sequence. That way when you come to then creating the song mode and actually arranging the beat, you're going to have a lot of movement and it's not just going to be repetitive. So if we play sequence 1 and then I'm going to go straight into sequence 2, you'll hear just a slight difference. You do this in real time as well by just hitting the knob to the right. And that is basically the basic process that you want to have bear in mind and repeat until you have a complete song. So this is just 2 sequences, but we could go ahead and then duplicate this sequence and add a piano that comes in. We could do so many different things. The bass line typically would change ever so slightly on each sequence as well. And then once you have all your sequences built up, you might have a chorus sequence as well, an intro sequence, outro sequence. If once you're at that stage, you just hit menu and you go to song mode, and it's just we're just going to add all our sequences in over here. So to do that, you hit insert. As you can see, our sequence has then popped up. So if you click on that and just hit the jog wheel, you can select through which sequence you want that to be, and this is going to play in a downward fashion. So let's start with sequence 1, hit insert, sequence 2, insert, sequence, back to sequence 1, and this is where you put your song mode together. So if we had like 10 different sequences, I'd be going through here, sequence 3, sequence 4, and so on. And then once you hit play, it will play that all together in the sequence that you've arranged it. As you can see. Now just to demonstrate a version of this beat where it's actually complete, let me load that up and you'll be able to see all the different sequences, and you'll be able to see how I use the same methods but just obviously spent a lot more time and dedication and just really focused and put a full beat together. Okay, is this the one? What's that beat called? Bear with me 1 second. Just need to find that beat. What's it called? I know what it's called. It's called Akai, I believe. Let's try this one. Don't know where that feedback's coming from. So this beat was made in the exact same fashion as the beat that I just put together, but obviously I spent more time. So as you can see, we have all the tracks named, just as we did in the other beat. We have the programs, we have the chops, we have where's the bass? At the bass, as you can see, not snaps to the grid, falling late like we did with the other beat. And then I would have just copied this sequence over and then made an adjustment. And I kept doing that until I had all the sequences that I needed. Then I went into the song mode and then laid them out. This is only a short little demo, but then you can play the beat in its order.